Rachel Gunn character I was telling you about with the breakdancing. You know, you get this person up here on a performance, they're horrible, and we all wonder why nobody ever told them they were horrible. Instead, everybody's like, you're great, you're wonderful, you're amazing, and then they come onto the national stage and they embarrass themselves and everybody else. Wouldn't the more compassionate thing be, hey, you're not good at this. I'm not saying you can't be, but I'm saying that your level of performance isn't where it needs to be for you to perform at this stage that you're attempting to stand on. Duane, what's up, man? It's been a long time since I've had the same person other than Kip appear twice in 2 consecutive weeks on the Order of Man podcast, man. Glad you're here.
Back to back. Yeah, thanks for having me.
How was it last week? Was it weird? Was it uncomfortable? I mean, obviously you've been in front of cameras and talking with people, but for some reason we get a little weird when we get behind this microphone.
Yeah, it is a little different knowing I'm being recorded. I used to do concerts, so I do live production. When I chose that industry, it was the live aspect on purpose because the recorded one was, you could always listen to it and tweak it and kind of analyze it. But when you're at a rock show, it was as good as it was that night, and everybody there is usually drunk, so it doesn't matter.
Well, that actually might be a little value add if our audience was drunk and wouldn't have to listen to our rambling and our mistakes. I did make a conscious effort years and years ago not to heavily manufacture the podcast. So when guys listen to the podcast, you're hearing the exact conversation. Unless one of my guests says, hey, I misspoke, or I said something I don't really want to put out there, I'm happy to honor that and respect that. But other than that, you're getting all the ums, the ahs, the pauses, the awkwardness, the coughs in the background, the sneezes. You're getting my dog or kids barking or playing in the background. You're getting it all, man. I feel like that's the least we could do because I think guys want to be included in the conversation. And if it's overly produced, it doesn't actually feel like a conversation.
I think people appreciate that. That's what I've appreciated listening to the podcast for so many years. It's a real conversation with somebody, no matter where you are or what you're doing. Like the one in Africa. You're like, we'll take some microphones. We'll do that out in the wild. And you're like, that's great. We couldn't hear any of the background noises. Everybody always thinks it's louder to you, the person putting on the podcast, than it is the audience most of the time, I think.
Yeah. Well, good, man. Well, like I said, I'm glad you're here, and it's always good to know I've got good people here in my absence and, of course, in Kip's absence today, and we'll miss him, but he's having a good time. So normally we start things off with a headline. I know you don't have a headline today. I failed to prepare you for that, but I do have one I wanted to talk with about. And I'm sure by now, there's so much controversy about the Olympics, and some of it I think is warranted, and other aspects I don't think are warranted. You had the opening ceremonies. You've got this individual who is still yet to be determined whether or not they're a male or a female. I have my suspicions that this is a male, meaning XY chromosomes. But other people are saying, well, she was born with female genitalia. The way I understand that is that if you have XY chromosomes, you're a male, and there is a birth defect that even with an XY chromosome, you can actually be born with female genitalia. That doesn't make you a woman. You're still a man, but there's a birth defect. Anyways, that's actually not the conversation I wanted to get into today. I wanted to get into this conversation about this Australian quote-unquote breakdancer. Duane, have you seen this this
yes,
performance, to use the term? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what an absolute mockery of what it means to be an Olympian. And that's really what it comes down to. This woman, I think her name is Rachel Gunn. She goes by Ray Gunn. She had come up with a presser or an announcement that, she was being harassed and targeted. And I actually believe that. And I don't think we need to do that. I don't. People have been making dumb mistakes for tens of thousands of years. And it really isn't until the last 20 to 25 years where it's been under so much scrutiny and hostility and hatred. So I don't like the side of it where she's probably being doxxed, she's probably being threatened. I don't like that side of it. But that said, I also don't appreciate this woman coming to the Olympics. This is the first year that breakdancing was to be in the Olympics. I don't think it should be in the Olympics anyways, but we'll table that discussion for a second. The fact of the matter it is, and she came into this to make a mockery of what those other people did to be in that spotlight. And that is the issue that I take from it, is that, you know, she said, oh, I worked my tail off. I worked as hard as I could. I wanted to entertain people. Believe it or not, we still live largely in a meritocracy. And I think if the Olympics can't embrace at its core the ideal of meritocracy, meaning you're being judged on your performance, I really don't know where else we can do that. And people will say, well, you know, it's about coming together. It's about honoring this and honoring that and working together. She did no honor to those men and women who actually did work their tails off, who actually did perform well. And she actually undermined the very thing that she said that she supports, which is breakdancing in the Olympics. I just have a hard time when people make light of these situations where other people have poured their heart and soul into for years and decades and potentially their life. So I have no sympathy except for the unnecessary targeting and hostility towards her. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the Olympics is not about fairness. Fairness in competition, sure. Maybe I'll say equality, not equity. It's not about making people feel good about underperformance. It's not about inclusivity. It's about performance at the highest level, regardless of sex or age or race or sexual orientation or nationality. It's about who is the best. So I think shame on her for dishonoring herself, for dishonoring the other athletes and dishonoring the Olympics. That said, again, my disclaimer is we can still feel that way and not personally attack the woman, not, you know, just with the level of hostility I've seen and animosity, not just with this, but everything else. It's really, really horrible. We can agree and we can disagree, but I think we need to refrain from the personal assault and attack on individuals just because they do something we don't necessarily agree with, unless it threatens ourselves. And then in that case, I'm happy and willing and embrace the idea of fighting for your rights. So that's my headline today.
I agree. I think that's a great headline. It was interesting to see other sports too that would have one representation from a country, but they didn't seem to qualify. They were like so far dead last that they didn't like come up through the normal qualification processes as everybody else. And I feel like that's setting a precedent there of like, oh, what level did you compete at in breakdancing to get to that level? And it's like, oh, you were just the only breakdancer from that country.
Right.
That's not competing against everybody else. Like you said, that's more inclusive as opposed to like best of the best. So I love to see the best of the best, no matter who it is. It would be interesting at some point to not limit it to 2 representation from each country. You're like, dude, if it's lined with, you know, Russians or English or whoever it is, okay, that's great. They're the best of the best competing against each other. I think that's really cool.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I also think that undermines the purpose of the Olympics because it is for national bragging rights, essentially, is what it is, right? Yeah. So Russia, you put up your best. America will put up its best. China, Pakistan, Australia, we'll all put up our best, and we'll see who is the best. So yeah. I think there is some merit to that. And also, I think because what you said is, in this case, Australia, if she's the only one participating, then she shouldn't qualify. I don't know. I think maybe do let these countries determine whatever their qualifications are, and they're going to make a mockery of themselves on the stage. But she deserves no sympathy or empathy for her performance. That's for sure.
Yeah. She definitely didn't compete with everybody else.
No doubt. Well, let's get into some questions today. We have a lot of questions. We've got some great ones from our exclusive brotherhood, the Iron Council, which opens up in a little less than a month over at orderofman.com/Iron Council. And then if we get to it, we'll jump over to Facebook. There were some really good questions I wanted to hit on Facebook. And I know you came prepared, so hopefully our thoughts are aligned and we'll get after it today.
Let's do it.
Who's first?
We are going to I did not write down the people who said it. I made notes in a separate
I might be able to
thing.
tell you. So if you have the question, I might be able to tell you who it is because I've got them pulled up here on my end too.
Perfect. Yeah. So I've got the first question I've got is what's the best decision you've ever made in building your business? And was it an intentional decision or an adjustment of a bad decision? Whether an intention or an adjustment what was your guiding principle that led that action?
Awesome. This one comes from Chris Kroom with Battle Team Navarre. So I was thinking about this. The best decision that I made was to niche my message. And the more polarizing I am, not for the sake of being polarizing, but the more firm I am in my beliefs and principles, the better off this movement does. I had an individual the other day, and I'm paraphrasing, allude to a post that I had made about 8 masculine political positions. And he's like, well, how could you tell another man what he should or shouldn't be? I'm like, I'm not telling another man what he should or shouldn't be. I'm giving you an opinion. And these are the opinions of myself as a representation of this movement. And if you don't agree with that, we can discuss it. But if you don't agree with the core tenets of what we're doing, this isn't the movement for you. And guys will say, well, that's just your opinion. Well, obviously, I know the distinction between an opinion and fact. And so when I say these are 8 masculine political positions, I'm not required to say this is my opinion because people aren't dumb. Most people aren't. Most people know, oh, this is this guy's opinion, or this is factual information, and there's a difference to be made. But I'm never afraid of rubbing people the wrong way. I'm not afraid of ostracizing people from our organization and our movement. A lot of people will say, oh, you need to be more inclusive and you don't want to create an echo chamber. Yeah, I don't want to create an echo chamber, but to say that we're just going to embrace everything and be all inclusive would water down the message and essentially undermine what we're doing here and erode the foundation of what we built. So the best decision that I have made in business is to make a hardline stance about what I believe, what my founding principles are, how they align with our movement to reclaim and restore masculinity, and then to put it out there in a powerful, unapologetic way. If somebody agrees with it, we welcome them here and we'd love to have them here. If somebody disagrees with it, but they want to be included in the discussion, great. If somebody vehemently disagrees with it and thinks that our movement is the bane of existence, then screw off. Go create your own movement of what you think masculinity is or what your thing is, but you're not doing it here. And I think there's so much weakness in society today that just says, hey, we need to include everybody. We need to make everybody feel good. Heaven forbid somebody feels offended or slighted in some way. I don't set out to do those things, but I don't really care if that happens as a byproduct of the values and the virtues that I espouse.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that changed at all since you've started the Order of Man? Like, I remember your story of like, hey, you were doing financial practice and you were doing the podcast, like in the closet, like nights and weekends and like trying to hustle it out. Was that the same feeling and thought early on in your journey?
I think maybe early on I was a lot more curious and inquisitive in what it meant to be a man. But over the past 10 years, in doing a lot of research, doing a lot of studying, reading a lot of books, listening to a lot of incredible men, interviewing nearly 500 very successful men, I've come to terms with what I believe masculinity and manliness is. That's not to say I'm not open to exploring other concepts and ideas, but I'm pretty confident and bold in my assertions in a way that I don't think I was 10 years ago. So I still do try to be curious. I still am aware that I'm not the epitome of masculinity and I don't have everything figured out. So I'm open to these new ideas, but also I have a lot of strong convictions based on my own personal experience and the experience of those people who have been connected to this movement in some way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love what you were talking about too, of niching down and saying, this is the audience that I'm going to talk to. A lot of times I've seen people try and be super famous to millions of people, and the message gets watered down, or they're not sure or clear on what they're providing or how they're going about it, as opposed to saying like, I'm going to be super famous. Like, everybody's going to know everything about us in like 1,000 people. And that's enough to really get your message out there and to make sure you're making an impact in a movement. Obviously, you want it to grow over time, But if you start there, then everybody really understands, and you have a very clear vision of what your company aspires to do. I think that's positive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, take the most famous person in the world, Donald Trump. And we're not talking about his politics. He is the most famous person in the world currently. I don't even think that's debatable at this point. He's not inclusive. He's one of the most polarizing people out there, and he knows exactly who he's talking to. So the idea that just because you are firm in your convictions doesn't mean that you can't have broad or mass appeal doesn't have a leg to stand on. You certainly can. Yeah, you might diminish it, but the thing that's interesting to your point is when you open up your message to everyone, that doesn't allow you to grow. The only thing it does is it looks like a watered down version to the dissenters, and it looks like you're acquiescing to people who don't believe in your mission to those true believers. So you're actually undermining both audiences, the people who really believe in you and the people that you're trying to make feel better about what it is you're saying. It's just not a great way to grow a movement. And look at any movement, whether it's Christianity and Jesus Christ. He didn't pull punches. Look at Hitler's Nazi, Germany. Like, it wasn't pulling punches. And I'm not speaking about the morality of these movements at this point. I'm just speaking of the appeal. When you're strong and bold and convicted, that's where people begin to believe in you and want to follow what it is you're doing. I think and hope it goes without saying that we want to do this in a righteous way to serve other people, not manipulate, take advantage of, and exploit other people.
I think that's good. We'll move on to our next question from Brandon Clement, one of the guys in the Iron Council. He says, as a veteran yourself, what is your advice today for your current service members, such as myself, that have been in over the halfway mark towards retirement? So he's in over halfway. Like, what would you recommend for somebody like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Brandon, appreciate your service, of course. Like you said, I'm a veteran as well. I spent 8 years in the Army National Guard, a year and a half of which was spent in the regular Army in Ramadi, Iraq in 2005 and 2006. So I've got a little bit of an experience with the military, not to the degree that I think you do, but I do have some experience. And I can say that the past 25 years, I don't believe that you're in the same military that you were when you likely signed up for the military. I don't know what branch Brandon's in. This is a completely different Army or Navy or Marine Corps or Air Force. It's Coast Guard. It's completely different. National Guard, Reserve. It's completely different, which is unfortunate. And I think as a leader, I'm sure at this point, Brandon, halfway into retirement, you're in some sort of leadership capacity that you have an obligation to your fellow soldiers or Marines. You have a responsibility to teach them right from wrong, teach them about moral conviction, teach them about doing the right thing, teach them about the nobility and the honor that comes with the line of work that you do, and then also reject some of these repulsive modern day liberal ideologies like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and making everybody feel special and safe and warm and comfortable and trying to find your true identity as a member of the military rather than embracing the mission first, right? These are all things that I was taught. So what I would suggest is, to the degree that you can as a leader inside of your platoon or battalion or whatever the terminology is for you in your service, is to embrace these same ideologies that we're teaching here and we're sharing here, and share those to the degree that you can, and work to influence those who are at your peer level and higher command as well. I would also say, on a personal level, as somebody who's maybe 10 or 15 years into your military service, that you really strongly consider now what it is you're going to be doing when you transition out of service. And let's hypothetically say that's the next 10 years. 10 years seems like a really long time, and you've got a steady job, you've got a steady paycheck, you've got job security, you're very clear on what it is you're to be doing. Sure, there's some uncertainty with potential deployments and things like this, but ultimately, like, you're pretty secure, and it might be tempting at times, even subconsciously, to rest on that, to be comfortable in that. But 10 years is going to come very quickly, and if you haven't thought about what am I going to do when I retire? How am I going to build up maybe a movement or a thought or an idea or a business on the side while I'm still in the military? You're going to find yourself in a really horrible position come 2035. So I would really work to figuring out what is your retirement plan now and start building the business, or at a minimum, building the civilian and military connections that are going to allow you to springboard into your next mission. We're in a crisis right now with military members who are killing themselves to the degree they never have before. And I think a lot of that is derived from a lack of purpose when they leave the military. You have a very clear purpose. It's been ingrained into you, into your DNA. You believe it wholeheartedly. You fight for it literally and figuratively every single day. When that military service ends, things change. And all of a sudden, you don't have that same sense of purpose. And that creates a lot of cognitive dissonance in a man. And it's something that a lot of men and women, veterans, struggle with. So figure out what your next mission is now and build that up over the next 10 years so that when you do decide to retire, you're doing it for the right reason, because you want to and you have something built up, and you have a really easy way to transition into your next mission, which allows you to provide your way of life and your family's way of life without any interruptions.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I took some notes on that, and one of the things that I was thinking about as well is making sure that you're always focused on a succession plan. I'm sure that's something that they preach a lot in the military. I was never in the military, so thank you for your service. And thank you again. Like, I really do appreciate everything that you've given for our country. It's awesome to be able to live the life that we do today because of everything that you've given. I know it's hard on the family and getting deployed and all that. But make sure that you're working on your succession plan. Like, you want everybody else behind you to be better equipped than you were. I would say teach them, like Ryan was mentioning, teach them what you've learned because it's gone well, or what you screwed up. Like, don't be too proud to be like, dude, don't do that. That's hard. This is why. This is how we're going to work around that, and making sure that everybody behind you is learning from your wins and your learns that you've gone through. And that way, when you do retire, you know we're still protected. You know that we have the best military because you contributed to it, and you're proud of what you've kind of left as a legacy behind in that area of life. And then I love working on something now moving forward. I always like real estate. I think real estate's a good investment for yourself long term. If you buy a house today, is it going to be worth more or less than it is in 10 years? More.
Yeah, more. Yeah.
More. Buy some, right? Like, that's something that you can do potentially that can make you some passive income on the side now, or maybe you could sell it later when you actually like get out of the service and retire. So those are a couple options you could take, but yeah, definitely make sure that you're leaving your post high and tight when you're done.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, man, what's next?
It's early November. Harris Waltz have won the election under dubious election results. People are frustrated. What do you do next?
So this one comes from Jimmy Halewood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the reality is that if, and here, I'm going to throw this prediction out now, and it makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit. I think that Harris is probably going to win the election. Again, it makes me throw up in my mouth. It makes me really sad for what this country has come to, for the amount of people that believe in complete and utter nonsense, and how we've shifted our ideals from these American virtues of rugged individualism and strength and sovereignty in our nation. We've moved so far away from that. I think that's what's going to happen at this stage. A couple of months ago, I was predicting Trump would win, and the Democratic Party, threw us a curveball. And when you say dubious, look, we don't even have to say outright rigging of an election, but it's dubious when 14 or 15 million registered Democrats vote for a potential candidate in Joe Biden without casting a single ballot or vote for Kamala Harris. So that alone is an issue. That subverts our democratic system of voting, our Republican way of life, or not Republican, excuse me, our republic, I should say. I want to clarify when I say that because I don't want that to get confused. So yeah, I think that's what's going to happen, and obviously it's dubious not only with her stepping into this role and backstabbing, her former President Biden in the back, but also if you just go ahead and take a look at the media and how they're running coverage for this ticket, it's asinine. I think at the time of this recording, we're on 28, 29, 30 days of absolutely zero difficult questions about her political ideology, her controversial comments and wish-washing on very important topics to the American citizen. So that's a problem. Like, you've got this media conglomerate running cover and washing over all of. She's a horrible, horrible candidate. I mean, she's never done anything great when it comes to politics in her entire political career. And to put it mildly, the way she even got into politics was less than reputable means, and that's not even contestable. That's a fact. Sleeping with supervisors and political people in positions of power to get to where she is today. She's failed up at every single level. That's not your question, but I just want to set that groundwork. So the first thing I would say is not even after the election, but sometimes when we think about these presidential elections, all we think about is, do I vote for Harris or do I vote for Trump? But we neglect all of the Senate races that are crucial in our states. I think, if I understand correctly, that the Republican Party has an opportunity to pick up somewhere between 10 to 12 contested senatorial positions in this election cycle, which would put, if Republicans were able to do that to the magnitude of 9, 8, 9, 10 seats, that would put the Republican Party largely in control of Congress, which is crucial. But you also have your state elections, you have county and city elections. These things are also very, very important. So let's not neglect those just because we're looking at whether or not we should vote for Harris or Trump. Outside of that, I think more men need to get involved in politics. More men need to be vocal. So if it does happen that way, there needs to be a lot more accountability for media. There needs to be a lot more accountability in the public sectors and also the private sectors and how government gets involved in these industries and crony capitalism and everything else. But we've talked a lot, and we will continue to talk at length about what a man can do, not only within the walls of his home, but in the boundaries of his city, and how he's supposed to be stepping up to lead people righteously and effectively and not embrace these liberal ideologies, but instead embrace righteous conservative principles that we know are time-tested to produce favorable results for countries and people. So we got a lot of work to do. My prediction is she will, at this point, win. And it is dubious already. It's only going to be worse. And we have a responsibility to step up and be the men we need to be, including voting for other candidates outside of the presidential election.
I think that's really positive to make sure that you're taking it locally as well and knowing what's happening in your own local community. I think that's going to have a bigger impact to your family and what's going on. I'd take it even one step further. Is like, party agnostic, I get it. Yeah, you're frustrated. Your team lost, right? You're like, what can we do in the future to make sure that your team wins? Like, why was that the candidate that was put up? Like, is that the only option? Can we be serving other men that do have values like we aspire to be? They should be somebody that you support. We should be sending people into these positions that represent our ideals. So if you're frustrated, get out there and do something about it. Be involved in your local politics, vote your way, make sure you show up to those board meetings, the community board meetings, whatever that might be. A lot of times it's just because we're not showing up, so you don't have a voice. It's good that you vote. That's good to know, but you vote once every 4 years? Or are you involved on a regular basis in your community?
The other thing I would add to that, as you were saying, is not only you be involved yourself, but you need to get other people involved. Like, you can't do it alone, but if every single one of us went to vote and we brought another person to vote with us, or we went to run for political office and we asked somebody to run with us or to help us champion what it is we're doing, we as men need to be able to enlist other people in these battles. So often we can make great decisions. Like you're going to go to the ballot box and you're going to vote, and you're likely going to make a great decision based on what your heart says at the ballot box. And it's not just about your heart, but hopefully your mind too. We're thinking about this logically. That's great. Everybody can do that. But not everybody is either willing or capable of rallying other men to do the same. And that's the only reason this mission has so much power, is not because I believe a certain way. It's because, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I have the ability to rally other people around a cause. And so unless you can get other people involved, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 people involved, then your rights and your ideology, the way you see life, is going to be railroaded and trampled on by those people who are good at rallying support. And they might be misguided. They might even be evil. And I think there's a lot of evil going on in politics right now on both sides of the aisle. But if you can't rally people, the other side that can rally will win. And that's really what it means when it comes to these elections, is which candidate, whether it's presidential, congressional, or city and state representatives, which candidate can rally their base. And the candidate who can rally the largest base wins. Now, there's exceptions. You know, when you have somebody like Sleepy Joe Biden, I don't think that Trump necessarily needed to rally his base, because Biden did such a horrible job in his tenure as president that his base just wouldn't come out and show up. But let's be really honest. Kamala's got an energized base that is going to come out and vote. And we need to be honest about that so we can adequately fight against it. And that means that we need to learn how to rally the troops and the support around a more righteous and noble cause.
Yeah, I agree. Next question comes from Woody Lord. When making a 20-year vision, how do you personally like to approach it? Do you start at 20 and work your way backwards, or do you start at year 1 and work your way forward, or something completely different?
Yeah, I don't plan in it. I don't have a 20-year plan. I mean, I actually don't even know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, let alone what I'm going to be doing in 20 years. So the 20-year plan isn't a thing for me. Now, there might be long-term goals and objectives, but they're loosely and broadly defined. They're not really hyper-specific. I get hyper-specific when you start getting into the sub-12-month category. So what am I going to do this year? And specifically, what am I going to accomplish this quarter? That's where I get really, really specific. But I do have a vision for myself, but it's not what am I going to do, it's who am I going to be? And there's a real distinction about the way I'm going to show up for my family, the way I'm going to show up in this business and this movement that we're creating, how I'm going to look physically, mentally, emotionally, my connection and relationship with God. That's who I'm going to be. And then I leave how it's going to happen, with the exception of my next 90 days to 12 months. I let the results take care of themselves, because I don't know what's going to happen. 10 years ago, if you would have said, hey, Ryan, you're going to be running this movement of millions and millions of men all rallying behind the cause of reclaiming and restoring masculinity, I'd have been like, what the hell are you even talking about? I was doing well in my financial planning practice, and I enjoyed it for the most part, and I was making good money. I knew how I wanted to show up, but if I wasn't open because I had pigeonholed myself into some plan over 20 years, I may not be in this position right now, and you may not be listening to this podcast. So I tend to look at the longer term as more behavioral and idealistic rather than pragmatic and practical, because I don't know what that's actually going to look like. There's new technology. I'm going to have new experiences. 2 years ago, I got a divorce. That wasn't in my cards. I hadn't planned for that. And that changes me. So now I'm a divorced man, a single father. And so what does that look like? And how does that impact the way I view the world and the way I view the work that I'm doing? I would have never have guessed that. That wasn't my dream or goal or vision or anything like that, but it happened nonetheless. And so we need to adjust and pivot. But I always know what kind of man I want to be and how I want to show up. And then the most I'm going to get in practicality is 12 months out, but more specifically, 90 days at a time. What is it specifically that I'm going to accomplish in each area or aspect of my life? That's how I plan personally. And that's very much in alignment with what we do in the Iron Council through the battle planning process.
I think that's powerful. I had very similar thoughts on that as like the 20 years really far out. I would say something that is helpful just to like make sure that you're centered on who you want to be as a man. We've done this here in the Iron Council is write your eulogy. Like write down what you want people to say about you when like after you die. Like everybody's gathered around. How many people are there? Is it a party? Is it somber? Is your family there? Do you have great grandkids? Like what does that look like? And what stories are they going to tell? Like, oh man, dude, that guy will jump out of any airplane all the time, goes on all the hunts, does the thing. Or is it, man, he was so genuine and kind and nice and friendly. Or, dude, have you seen his car collection? It can be anything you want it to be. But at that point, that kind of sets that direction. So you have a compass. You just kind of know where you want to be. Like we know Ryan was in a different career, but he's still a similar man, like at his core, the values and the principles. I think we all have that. But if you set that in your eulogy, I think that's really helpful to like get you to figure out what you want to be and like how you want to work towards that. And that might help set some of those milestones to work yourself towards. Kind of like we were talking about in the retirement. That's 10 years. Okay, so what is that going to look like afterwards? And is it, I was super successful in business, or was it, great dad? Or both, right? But you can do either one. But the eulogy really helps kind of lock in the end, and you can work your way backwards a little bit from that. But I agree with Ryan, one step at a time, and just be focused on what you're doing and kind of enjoy the journey because you never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah. No, well said. Well said. Cool. All right, what's next?
Next question is from Nathan Struble. How do you build a better work ethic?
My knee-jerk reaction is you just do it. You just make the decision that I'm going to work harder, right?
Yeah.
Because that really is a decision too, isn't it? I mean, I woke up this morning at 4:30 in the morning, and I've been waking up early because I'm trying to get used to my schedule being back from South Africa last week. And so I woke up at 4:30 this morning, and I laid there. I'm like, oh, this bed's comfortable. I'm going to lay around. I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to sleep a little longer, which actually would have been justifiable. I could wake up at 5:30. That's still early by any objective standard. But instead, I thought to myself, no, you've been to the gym every day for the last 6 days, so you're going to make it 7. And it was just a decision. Today as I'm getting through my work, there's little opportunities to be distracted, whether it's social media or cleaning the house or any number of things that I think are even maybe what we would call righteous or noble obstacles, meaning they have to get done, but they're tricky enough that it actually keeps you from what you should be doing. And then you just have to make that decision. There is some tactical things that you can do, like having a plan. That's a huge benefit for me, is I plan my day the night before. And so I'm right. I've got my battle planner pulled up right here. I'm writing what I need to get done tomorrow in this battle planner. When I think about my workout, I know exactly what my workout is for the morning. It's on my phone. I pull it up. I look at it. I've got my water in the fridge, so it's cooling off. I've got all of my, my shoes and socks and gym clothes set right here up on the nightstand, ready to go. Like I'm planning everything out to the nth degree the night before to create as little friction as possible for what would inevitably come up the next day. So I'm thinking about and anticipating what the problem is and what challenges and what hurdles, and then making sure everything is just completely greased so that I can slide right into being as effective as possible based on my battle plan to the previous question. So that's going to be really helpful. And then the other thing that I would suggest on this is making sure that you're tying directly into why it's so important. And I hate that of like, know your why. It sounds so trite. It's a cliche, and it is because it's true. If you can really tap into your why, and your why can't be, for my kids, because that's not powerful enough. I'm not saying your kids aren't a powerful enough motivation. I'm saying that terminology is not powerful enough. Instead, it might be, I want to make sure that my daughter knows how a really good and strong man shows up so that when she decides to get married, she'll have a great litmus test to measure her selected partner against. See the difference? Same concept. You're showing up because your kids are important, but that one's so much more tangible. There's so much more of an emotional connection to it. You know, if you're wondering about getting in shape, you might say, oh, just so I feel better. I don't think that's powerful enough. Of course you want to feel better. We all do. But what do you mean exactly? Like, how good would it look to or feel to look in the mirror and, you know, start to see some lines on your stomach instead of this big inflated, you know, bouncy ball around your waistline? Or how would your wife view you if you had lost 30 or 40 or 50 pounds? Or what would your intimacy look like if that were the case? Or how would other people treat you? How would you feel about yourself? These are the things that we need to tap into, the very emotionally charged, acute thoughts that cause us to remember, oh, you know what? Don't pour yourself that bowl of Cheez-Its that you want to have. Or don't go to McDonald's today. Instead, have the leftover steak and broccoli from last night. Because that stuff's hard. For some people it isn't. For me it is. It's hard to be disciplined to do the things that we know we should be doing. So you have to have these really strong emotional anchor points that secure you to good, wholesome decisions. And those are the things that I think about. Not, I want to make more money. It's not about more money. It's what are you going to do with the money? I want to tour the world. Okay, well, why is that important? I want to be exposed to different cultures. I want to have different experiences. I want to have new stimulus. I want to see new things. I want to expand my horizons. And all of that is possible if I make more money. And I make more money if I do my work today. So that's what works for me.
Yeah, something you mentioned there is also like the words you're telling yourself. Like internal self-talk is very powerful. I would say, better work ethic starts with that personal identity, like who you identify as a man and how you're going to better the world because of it. Like, what are you doing that really fires you up? Like we were talking about your vision of who you want to be. You could even look at that 20-year vision that we were talking about in the last question and use that as a directional compass and say, like, I'm going to show up this way because I'm the best dad. I'm going to create a really good environment for my family, all of that. That's why I work hard, is to be the good example, right? But saying that you're a hard worker, who is it? The Rock's always like, hardest worker in the room. And I was like, all right, let's go. Let's prove it, right? Like, working hard is really powerful, and it gets you to those other, it unlocks a lot of those other things. It's the discipline equals freedom mindset that allows you to go on those vacations or provide for your family, have a nice house, anything they want or need, you're always there to provide for them. So that's what we talk about, the protecting, providing, and presiding, is because you have a good, solid work ethic. So I think if you change that identity to say, I already have that, wake up and be like, I'm a hard worker, let's get after it, and then tie your outcomes to the hard work that you're doing, I think that'll really push you forward and make you want to get up in the morning. You're excited about it, right?
Yeah, no, well said. I had a good conversation at the podcast just released with a man by the name of John Daly yesterday, and he and his counterparts were responsible for creating what we know as Marine Raiders now, currently. And we talked a lot about this idea of identity, but the other thing that he talked about was making sure you're surrounding yourself with the right people. And what he noticed is that when people were going through the Marine Raider selection process, 80% of those people are weeded out even before they get into the program. And what he noticed is of the 20% that were remaining, some of those would self-select out because they were so used to being a big fish in a small pond, and now they're a medium-sized or small fish in a big pond of hard chargers and high achievers. And it got me thinking that we need to really be aware of who we're surrounding ourselves with, because who was it that asked this? Nathan. To Nathan's point, if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are undisciplined and lack motivation, they're kind of lazy, then they're going to consciously and even subconsciously encourage and foster your own laziness. But if you're spending time with me, again, at the risk of sounding arrogant, we're friends and we're talking and we're communicating, we're doing things together, you're going to see things that I might not come out and say you're lazy. I might not say that, but you're either going to do one of two things. You're going to start running harder to catch up, or you're going to weed yourself out because you feel inadequate. That's one of two things is going to happen. And you just have to make the decision that I'm going to stick around, I'm going to learn from these people, and I'm going to put myself in proximity to hard chargers and high achievers, knowing and having faith that if I do, then they're going to hold me accountable, even subconsciously, even passively. Indirectly, they're going to hold me accountable to improving my performance on a daily basis. So look at your demographic of the people that you hang out with as well, because that might tell you a lot about who you are and how you're showing up.
That reminds me of the fitness challenge that you sent to the Iron Council. Like, let's do this. Who's going to have the biggest body transformation by the end of the year?
Yeah.
And a bunch of guys signed up for it, right? There were a bunch that didn't, and there were reasons or excuses because of it. But yeah, I mean, when you're around people like that are always challenging you in a positive, like who's going to be mad that you're like, hey, I bet you can't run further than I can. Okay, we're both running together, right?
Right.
And then when you do run together, have you ever noticed when you do run with somebody else, you constantly speed up? It's really hard to keep the same rhythm because you're just eyeballing the other person and you're going faster and faster and faster, right? So I think it's really powerful. Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
And you're going to lose the challenge, by the way. So, yeah.
We'll see. To be determined. Are you in the challenge? Next
question comes from Johnny Loretti, one of the battle team mentors in the Iron Council. He says, when praying to God to guide you through a challenge and believe you receive a response, how do you know it's really him? And how do you distinguish your gut from his words?
Well, I don't actually think that you need to distinguish your gut from God's influence. That's one thing I would have you consider. You know, I know we don't talk a lot about in this movement, and I think just societally in general, some of these more difficult to quantify sensations that we have, right? Everybody knows taste, touch, sound, feel, all these things. But there is divine intervention in the form of your gut. You could call it instinct. You could call it your gut. You could call it a feeling. You could call it your conscious. You could call it Jiminy Cricket for all I care. But the reality is that God is influencing you, and I don't think you have to recognize it or feel like, oh, it's like, I don't know. I guess the point I'm making is God is never part of the clouds for me and sent a white dove and had the angels trumpet and tell me exactly what I should be doing. He's never done that. I think that'd be nice if he did, but I don't think that's going to happen. The way I think it happens is in a still small voice. And sometimes that's a little prompt that you don't know. Like you don't know it's God. It's just a feeling, right? Like I've had feelings in certain situations. I remember one in particular. My ex-wife and I at the time, we were looking for a new home, and we were driving around the community and we found this place, and it looked like it was abandoned, but there was a real estate sign on it. And we drove up to the driveway, to the garage, and I called my real estate agent, and he said, I can't remember. I think he said, I'm not there right now. I can come out, in an hour, but the back door is open. He either told us it was open or gave us the code. It was something like that. And so her and I went around back and we opened the sliding door and we were wandering around a little bit, and both of us looked at each other and we had this very clear, very distinct feeling that we should not be in that house in that moment. We didn't communicate it. We didn't ask each other about it. I said to her, hey, you know what? I don't feel right. Like I don't feel comfortable here. Let's get going. And she said, yeah, I actually feel the same. So we got in the truck and we left. I don't know what would have ever come of that. I don't know if we were actually in danger, but what I do know is that several weeks later, we ended up not purchasing that house, but several weeks later, what we did find out is that house was notorious for having squatters in the home that were doing drugs in that home because it was abandoned. Now, maybe we were the only ones there. Maybe somebody was there. Maybe somebody was around the door upstairs in the upstairs bedroom with a gun or a knife because they felt threatened. I don't know. I'll never know. But what I do believe is that that was some divine intervention on behalf of God in our benefit. But again, it wasn't the trumpets. It was, this doesn't feel right. But here's what I would say. The more that we listen to these promptings, small, little, maybe even times insignificant or silly promptings. I've had promptings of like, I'll be driving down the road and it'll say, don't go down that road, do this. Or don't say yes to this thing, do that. And I don't even question it anymore. But what I do know is the more that we listen to it and then we act on it, the more prevalent that righteous voice becomes in our lives. It's like the saying, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. How many of us do that? We have this beautiful gift of divine intervention and a pathway to his righteousness. And we're like, no, that's dumb. That's stupid. That's silly. And we don't listen to it. And then we wonder, how come God doesn't speak to me? He does. You're just not listening. So listen, act, and then it becomes stronger. But Johnny, I wish I could tell you, it's this 3-part formula. If you answer these 3 questions, yes, then you know it's from God. If you don't, then you know it's yourself. I think pray about it, and act on things that you think are righteous, and I think it will be revealed to you.
Yeah, that's good advice. It reminds me of the parable of the guy that's out. He's kind of stranded out in the ocean, and he's praying like, save me. And this guy comes by in a rowboat, and he's like, no, I'm praying for God to save me. And he's like, okay, that's cool. And then somebody else comes by, a little while later in a speedboat, and is like, hey, I'm here to help. Like, what's going on? He's like, no, I'm praying for God to save me. And the guy ends up dying, goes to heaven, and God's like, what are you doing, man? He's like, well, I've been praying and you didn't save me. He's like, I sent all these people to save you. It might not look exactly like what you think it does, but how often is it the harder option, right? Like, it was probably convenient to buy that house and be like, yep, this is the one. You're like, no, we're going to have to keep looking, or, we're going to, have to rent another couple months and have double mortgages, whatever that might be. It's usually the harder path too. And I think that sometimes gives us a little hesitation. God wants what's good for you, I believe, but sometimes that comes at the harder path, right? Like working out, that's harder, but it makes you better because of it, right? So I think just being open to that, and if you had to pick the harder route, I think that's where he's probably could be guiding you at times.
And I would take some faith in this too, is that as long as it's not obviously stupid or unrighteous,
detrimental,
you can go ahead and make the decision, because even if it doesn't work out the way you hope it does, I believe he has a plan. And even if you deviate from his plan, he can still use those experiences and your poor decisions in the best interest and benefit of you and the people around you. So you can have some faith in that too, as long as it's not obviously something you shouldn't be doing, some dumb decision or some immoral thing, right? Then I think you're pretty safe.
Yeah. Good stuff. Next question comes from Brett McCulley. He says, we all feel like we're called to help somebody in need and find out that many don't want to be helped. What would be a good mental and emotional test to decide when to be persistent when helping them, or when to let it alone, when to leave them alone?
I think this is a very, very simple answer. It's difficult to do because you care about these people. If you didn't care about them, you wouldn't even be asking the question. You'd be indifferent to it. But the answer is very, very simple, and that is, are they implementing your advice? That's it. If somebody comes to me, for example, and they say, hey, Ryan, I want to start a podcast. I want to have this thing be as successful as yours and bigger, and I want to do all these things, and you've done a lot of this. And I say, great, let's talk. And I give them 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 ideas, and they do none of them. And instead they're like, that didn't work, or I didn't have the time, or I didn't feel like I wanted to do that. Then that's a person that I can no longer work to serve, because they might be interested in my ideas, but they're not interested in applying those ideas for their own benefit. And so I'm not going to waste my time in doing that. Now, there are some decisions that you might make where it is not contingent upon their performance, and then you just have to make that decision that you're going to do it regardless if they perform or not. What might an example be of that? Charity. You donate to the food shelter. Okay, and let's say you're at the food shelter and you've got a line of people coming through and you serve 200 people that day, and out of the 200 people that came by, only 5 of them say thank you. Are you never going to do it again? No, because that's not why you were doing it. You were doing it purely because it was a charitable thing to do, or financial contributions. You know, you might donate to an organization or a cause or a charity or even an individual, and, you know, maybe they don't make the best decisions. Are you never going to be charitable again? No, you're going to continue to be charitable because it's the right thing to do. But in the context of what you're talking about, if you have close family members or friends or acquaintances, the last thing you want to do is be used by them. So if they come to you with ideas or thoughts, and by the way, I don't offer a whole lot of unsolicited advice anymore to people because it's just nobody ever appreciated unsolicited advice. But if they're coming to you and they're asking for advice and then you share it with them, if they implement it even to the nth degree, then I would say that's a person worth continuing to invest in. But if they don't ever do anything with the information that you give them, wish them luck, wish them the best, don't hold any ill will, like genuinely be supportive of them and want the best for them, just know it's not you that's meant to provide it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink mentality. Of like, you're trying, right? And potentially you're just the first seed in that idea. How many times have you ever had a good idea and you talk to your wife and you're like, this is amazing? Potentially it's unsolicited advice, like Ryan was saying. But how many times has she come around and been like, I heard this thing one of my friends said, or I saw it on a podcast. It's what you were saying. And you're like, oh, cool. Maybe it just needed to hit a different way. So it might not be that what you're saying is wrong. It just might not be that you're the right person to deliver that message to them. But hearing it multiple times might have pushed them like in the right direction. So, you know, give it your best effort, lead the horse to water, and, you know, see if they're going to take action. Like Ryan said, I think that's very positive.
Well, and I also think leave the door open. I had a guy on Instagram message me the other day, and he had said, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry about the comments that I made on your post, and I was in a bad headspace, and here's where I was at, and I was holding on to some contention and animosity." Frankly, I don't remember what he had said. I can let that stuff slide pretty well, so I don't really remember exactly what he was talking about. But I'm not going to shun the guy. I'm not going to say, "Oh, too late," like, you know, you were a jerk then or whatever. You said these things that offended me, and so you can never have access to me again. No, you leave the door open so that when people are ready to step through, to your point, because they might not be ready or they might not hear it the right way or they might have their own thing going on. And I've done that too, where let's say, Duane, I was helping you with some business stuff and I could see that you were never interested in taking action. I would tell you respectfully, "Hey, Duane, you know, I've shared a lot of things with you over the past month, and it seems like you have an excuse for everything and you're not really willing to engage in this stuff. And I don't know if you have your own personal issues going on or some mental blockages there. But at this point, you know, I've got to bow out from this relationship because I have people who are really interested in implementing the ideas that I have to share. And I want to make sure I give them as much time and energy as I can. But I'll tell you what, if and when you're ready to be more serious about taking action on these things, will you please let me be the first person to know so I can continue to pick up where we left off?" I think that's a gracious way to do it. It has some accountability in it, like, hey, I'm not doing this if there's no reciprocity, but also it's some grace and some class in it that if you are really willing to take action, then I'm willing to help. And I think that's a really, really powerful way to approach it.
I think that's great. That'd be really helpful. I'm sure some people need to hear that too. So many times people just like kind of get brushed off or kind of back off and we're like, oh, where is this guy? It's hard to get a hold of, you know, but having that frank conversation with them is very powerful. I think that's something that's missing a lot.
I was just going to say that it's missing from society because everybody's dancing on eggshells and tiptoeing around and like, heaven forbid somebody feels bad because I may have said something. There's a way to say things, of course, But I think we as men can be more bold and assertive. I did a podcast last week on it, the Friday Field Notes, about the importance of being assertive. We can do it tactfully. We can do it respectfully. We can do it with love and charity and a heart of service. But also we can be bold and audacious and make those strong claims and comments. I think it's crucial.
Yeah, and it respects your own, sovereignty in a way that you're like, hey, I'm protecting my own time. Like I'm going to give as much as I can, but if it's not, received, you're not going to take any action on it. Why would I continue to do the same thing over and over?
Well, it's also respectful to the other person. That's the thing that people don't get, and this goes back to this Rachel Gunn character I was telling you about with the breakdancing. It's the American Idol phenomenon. You get this person up here on a performance, they're horrible, and we all wonder why nobody ever told them they were horrible.
Right.
Instead, everybody's like, you're great, you're wonderful, you're amazing. And then they come onto the national stage and they embarrass themselves and everybody else. Okay, wouldn't the more compassionate thing be, hey, you're not good at this? Like, I'm not saying you can't be, but I'm saying that your level of performance isn't where it needs to be for you to perform at this stage that you're attempting to stand on. So let's get you introduced to some coaches. Let's, work through some things. But I think the more appropriate thing to do, and frankly, the more kind, compassionate thing to do is to be honest with people. Think about that in relationships too. Sometimes women and men both do this, but they'll no longer be interested in a relationship, but they're so afraid of and I've done this, but they're so afraid of having a difficult conversation, they just ghost. And I've been guilty of that, but I also know that the more appropriate thing, although it brings up a difficult conversation, is to address it head on and actually tackle the issue. That's the kinder thing to do. That's the more empathetic thing to do.
Totally. I agree.
Yeah. Well, Duane, let's wrap this up, man. I know we got a lot of other questions. We've been up for about an hour now, so let's save those questions for next week, but let's wrap this one up for today.
Sounds good.
Guys, if you're interested in joining the Iron Council, that's our exclusive brotherhood. We're talking about this stuff, but on a much deeper level. And the beauty of what we do in the Iron Council is it's not just theoretical, it's practical. So we take these concepts, these abstract ideas and concepts and thoughts, and we codify them into systems and structures and accountability so that we're not just dancing around all of these issues we know we should be doing. Duane, I don't think there's anything that we shared today that isn't new, or that is new, I should say, for other people. It's just, but we want to make sure we give you the system, the process for actually implementing this stuff in your life. And that's what you can find as a benefit of the Iron Council. So go to orderman.com/Iron Council. Outside of that, connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, wherever you're doing the social media thing, and we'll keep the conversations going. Duane, I'm sure we'll have you back very soon. Kip's going to be back next week, as am I. So we're going to boot you, but I promise you're going to get an invite back.
All good. Thanks, man.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Today. Glad to know you, and thanks for your service inside the Iron Council. You're doing great work for the men there too.
Thank you.